welcome, though, for this infusion session. As you guys know, in this series, as imagined by Zoo and presented by Banque Nationale, aims to support entrepreneurs in addressing key concepts relating to the startup development. It's all about helping you structure, think about key concepts, ask specific questions about these concepts. And today we are covering investments and everything you need to know about it from an operational standpoint, from a legal standpoint. And we have with us some of the best people potentially in the industry to help you address certain questions regarding your private investment. The first one with us today is Eric Durand from National Bank, who's the Creative Industries Group Senior Manager. We also have Mathieu Deschamps, who's partner at Norton Fulbright, and Bianca Pietracupa, who's an associate and trademark agent at Norton Fulbright, Canada. Thank you all again for joining us. And without further ado, the first person who's going to start the presentation today and kick off this whole this infusion session is Eric. Hi, Eric.
Hello, all. Nice meeting you virtually, but still nice meeting you all. You want me to start the presentation right now?
Yes, sir. You can share your screen and
right
we're good to go.
Hopefully it does work. You see the presentation now?
Yes.
All right.
You.
So I was asked to talk about financing at the startup level and the seed level. So it's basically what I will be talking to you today. I know it's not always easy to finance at the startup and seed level, but there are solutions, and we're going to talk about that. So what type of financing should I want? Ultimately, what you want is anything that is free or low cost, that would ultimately have no maturity date or any really flexible amortization, that would not be dilutive and wouldn't have any constraints. Of course, there's real life, and you cannot necessarily achieve all that. This is basically everything that you can find in a capital structure of a business. I would stick with the bottom part, which is the common equity, and the top part, which is the senior debt. And there's an arrow on the left, and the more you go down the triangle, the more risky it is, and the more expensive it is. The more you go up the triangle, the less risky it is, and the less costly it is. And unfortunately, a startup and a seed company is more risky than an established corporation. So likely you will end up looking at the bottom part of the triangle. So how much does equity cost? I just gave you a simple example to show how much equity costs. Equity is pretty expensive, and it may not look like that at first sight. So in this example, the current value of the equity would be $1 million. So that's the value of the business. Say you achieve success, your business plan goes well, and the value in 5 years is $5 million. So today, for $500,000 of equity investment, will give the investor 33% of the business. The value of his equity portion in 5 years will be $1.65 million. That's an annual compound rate of 27%. So that's more expensive than any loan you can find in the market. So although equity may seem less costly because it doesn't have any impact on your cash flow day to day, in fact, it is probably the most expensive way to finance a company. But what's the truth about equity? of course, I'll look at the right side first. The cons, it's expensive. We just showed it. You have a loss of an equity position, so you dilute yourself. You may lose control of the business. There's a loss of control because they will, even if the investor is not a majority investor after the transaction, they will ask you for management and governance control. So you cannot necessarily do what you want. Say you need a Porsche to go see your client and the investor thinks you need a Honda, you're going to drive a Honda. The pros, well, it's not a liability. So if you fail, the investor loses his money and you don't lose your house. It's easy on the cash flow during the early and growth phase because equity doesn't call for a regular stream of payment. It enables scaling to the full potential. So you have money, you don't have to pay out debt, you can invest in a business, and further down the road, having a good equity position will put you in a better situation to put debt into the company once you have revenues and a profit. You can benefit from the investor's experience. A lot of times the investors that will invest have experience in your field of business, have contacts that they can share with you. They can coach you. And later on in the process, as I just said, lenders love equity and equity partners in a balance sheet. It secures the lenders. So is equity really that bad? I don't think it is, but although it's expensive, it's got its advantages. There's a financial partner for every stage of your life, of the business life. Of course, I put a little star at the bottom. We're currently speaking about businesses that would be in the two first blocks. So debt will not necessarily be, or regular debt or secure debt will not necessarily be available for this type of business. So basically it's going to be personal investment, equity capital, equity partners, microloans, grants, crowdfunding. We'll talk a bit about that later. I'm going to skip that one. So what's the difference between an investor and a lender? For an investor, the current cash flow is not that important. For an lender, it's very important because the current cash flow enables you to pay the lender. The collateral is not important for an investor. It's very important for the lender. Having a strong balance sheet is not important for an investor. They know you don't have a strong balance sheet, so they come in. The lender wants you to have a strong balance sheet. All things you don't have right now, or likely do not have right now. What's important for the investor? It's you have a vision. There's the market potential for your product. Do you have a good management team that has the experience and the ability to carry on the business plan? And they want to know about your burn rate. They want to invest, but they want to know that they will invest enough to go to the next milestones. I'm just going to try to move something on my screen here. Can I move this somewhere else? Yes. All right. So what can you expect? First, personal investment, savings, family, friends. You would be surprised how many people can help you, and I will be willing to invest a few bucks in your project. Grants and government-led institutions, tax credits, Canadian Media Fund, if you're anything in the medias. BDC has some small loans for entrepreneurship that are quite easy to get. Development Economic Canada, I should have put that in English, but PME Montréal, IQ, or the Ministry of Economy and Innovation. If we have Ontario people, Ontario Creates is quite aggressive in a lot of field these days. I've seen that particularly in the video game industry. Order provincial, every provinces have their program. Associations and foundations. So if you developing anything that has to do with a disease, the foundation of that disease may be willing to help you. Any foundation that is close to what you're doing may be interested in your project. Associations. There are many women associations right now that will invest in women-led businesses, for example. So, those are all small amounts that you can gather and build around with this. Then you go to funds. Funds, incubators, accelerators sometimes have their own investment funds, dedicated funds. So a fund that would be dedicated to such type of industry for startup business. There are not that many, but some exist. Privately held funds, angel funds, namely high net worth individuals that would be interested in investing in helping new entrepreneurs. Corporate investment, although you may be too early, because corporate investors usually want to have a stereotype or a proof of concept that the product is really working. Crowdfunding, you need to have a product that targets the mass if you want to have a lot of people, because basically what you do when you do a crowdfunding is you sell the product ahead of time. So you need a lot of people to be willing to buy. We see a lot of crowdfunding in the video game industry these days. You need a target list. Just don't go put your name on Kickstarter. You need to have a marketing strategy to back that up. So once you put your name on Kickstarter, you have to send tons of emails to a lot of people that will either buy it or either relay your information. So you want to create a certain buzz around it and have a lot of investors coming in. And then you have the lenders and senior VCs. I would say expectations should be minimal at this stage. And maybe some alternative lenders may be a better option, depending on what you have on your balance sheet and what you can offer. Oops. A few thoughts about financing. I would say talk to people, show your passion. Passion and vision can do a lot. When you talk to people, they have to sense that you like what you're doing and you're very interested and you're passionate about it. And even if they don't invest themselves in your project because you're not at the stage you're looking at, you're not the type of investment they're looking. If they like you, they will talk about you to someone else. They will usually be receptive in helping you and connecting you with someone else that can help you. Build a network to keep it up to date and keep it up to date. So even if someone didn't invest in your business at this time, maybe they will be willing to invest at a later stage in your development. So keep them informed. Is that for a regular email, a phone call? You cannot call everyone every month, but there's a way to keep people informed, and eventually maybe they will come back to you. And maybe eventually they will think about someone that could help you that didn't think about the first time you met them. Be receptive to constructive feedback. So when you meet an investor, sometimes they will not invest, but they will tell you a few things that should make you think about your business plan. I'm not saying change your business plan every time someone tells you something, but just take the feedback and build on it. Remember that financing is an ongoing process. It's not necessarily, no is not necessarily no forever. So you can come back to the same investors later on in your life, and they will be able to help you. Although you need money in the short term, think for the long term. Getting equity may help in future rounds. As I said earlier, if you have a good equity in your balance sheet, when it will be time to get debt, having a strong balance sheet would help you with the lenders. Choose the right partner. So you need money in the short term, don't jump on the first check. Be sure the person you're going to work with is someone you want to work with, that someone believes in your plan. Take everything that is free, for, of course, any grants and stuff like this you should take, but don't look only at pricing. Conditions and flexibility matter as much as pricing. So sometimes you will have an instrument that's a little bit more expensive, but offers you more flexibility. The example we had earlier in the presentation about equity. Equity is expensive, but it's got its benefits. Some type of debt are expensive, but they have their benefits. No repayment for a few years and stuff like this. Gives you a lot of air in the first years while you're implementing your business plan. Don't be arrogant, but don't look desperate either. So always be casual when you meet people. Be, we say affable in French, but don't look desperate. If you look desperate, nobody's going to invest in your business. It's your first round, but not the last. So always remember that. So talk to people, and people will talk about you. When a lot of people, if they cannot help you, are willing to help you in another way. Okay. Some more thoughts. Surround yourself with quality people. I think that's quite important to have a good team around you. Work with people that like your project and can help you. Grants are great, but for a limited amount. So go for grants, but it's not the only way you will be able to finance your business. You will need a few more investment. Debt is cheap, but calls for a regular stream of payment. Can you deliver the stream of payment? How much of a distraction will that be to deliver that stream of payment every month? Your partners want to make money, and it's okay. So you will dilute yourself. It's expensive and everything. And you may be in a situation where you think you're doing all the work while the investor is not doing much. To bring a business plan to conclusion, you need an idea and vision. Hopefully you have that. You need operations. You need someone to make that happen. Maybe you're that person. Maybe you need a partner to do that with you. And you need cash. So the investors have the cash. You don't. So everyone is important, and everyone's going to ultimately be a part of the success of the business. At the end, a few of everything, maybe your best round of financing, a few grants, a few foundation, a few personal investment, a few friends, a few small loans, and that will be your best your best round. A bit of equity with an angel. You know, you will build the $500,000 or $2 million you're looking for with many sources. Don't expect necessarily to get just one check at one door. Dilution may not be that bad after all. Cash is king, and that means that you will eventually need to make compromises to get the money you need for your business. What to put in your put in your business and financial plan when you're meeting with investors. Be realistic about where you are at. You know, don't think you're already that big. Be realistic about what are your assets, what you have and what you don't have, and what you need. I'm not saying to short sell yourself, but you know, don't be too ambitious. What is your market, and what needs do you address? Is there really a market? How big is that market? Is your product that much better than what is already on the market? How do you differentiate yourself? That's things that investors will want to know. What is the industry business model? What is your business model? How do they differ? Why? How will this impact your go-to-market strategy? And it might be okay to have a different business model. A few years back, every software company was selling a software for like $700. Today, nobody sells a software for $700. Everybody sells a software for that much a year. A lot less than $700, but regularly. The model has changed. So there's someone that did it first. So changing the business model may be a good strategy as well. So, but you have to explain why you're changing the business model. What is your go-to-market strategy? To who, how, and when? Have a 12-month budget and sound assumptions. And the budget is P&L, cash flow, and balance sheet. Cash flow is the most important thing for a startup company, a lot more than P&L. You don't have revenues, or you have minimal revenues. Avoid hockey stick sales projection. What's your pricing versus the cost of producing the product? So are you going to be able to go to market with the pricing you need to make that profitable compared to what's already on the market? Know your cash cycle, how the money comes in the business, how it come out, how it comes out of the business, how it will come back in the business. Show you know your subject and be well prepared. How much do you need? What milestone will you achieve with the money? So the investor will want, okay, yeah, you want $500,000, you want $1 million, but what are you going to do with this? When we meet 12 months down the road, when you've burned all that cash, what should I expect you to have achieved with this? And what will be next step? Do not blur people with too many numbers, but highlight the good ones. People want to know about market size, revenues, gross margin, profit, if any, your cash health, your cash needs, and your burn rate. Inspire confidence. So management, what's your education, experience, realization, what's the scope of the team, who holds the key positions, what's the team? How do you manage your personal affairs may influence people. If you go to see a bank at early stage, it might be difficult, but if you have a bad credit profile, it may not give them a good vision of how you manage your own business. So the way you manage your personal affairs might reflect on how you will manage your business. Avoid complex corporate structures. You're a small business. You know, I've seen so many businesses that are small but have a structure like it looks like IBM or something like this. You will spend most of your presentation times talking about your structure and not your business. Don't be an IP only company. I know my friends here from Norton Rose will talk about IP later on, but IP is great. You need to protect your IP, but you need to do business as well. You know, modulate your speech. Either you talk to an angel, a VC, or a bank. Same story. Don't change the story, but emphasis on what is important for your interlocutor. You talk to the bank, talk about profit, talk about security. You talk to an angel, talk about the market, talk about, you know, the product, your vision. By the way, the best do well in all the categories. Like the best are generally well structured. They have a good business plan, good financial projection, good marketing plan, a good product. They address a good market. They've done their homework in all the fields. What are the most common mistakes for that we find in the financial statement for startups? The first one, not having financial statements at all. People are starting a business. They have, of course, no revenues. They just have a few dollars in a bank account. They don't think having financial statements is that much important. And it may not be at that time. But, and sometimes they have financial statements because they go see the accountant every year, but they don't have interim financial statements. They don't do budget tracking. So you have a budget. If you don't have interim statements, you don't know how you're doing versus the budget. So there's no cash flow statement. Cash flow is the most important thing as well. Or financial statements made by your uncle. Your uncle may be a great guy at Christmas, but unless he's a certified accountant or accounting is his job, maybe having a financial statements made by your uncle is not the best idea, because may not be the quality that people will look at. And maybe the numbers will not be the right numbers down the road. Then you're asking, so we're losing money, we're in development, everyone knows that. What is the purpose of having financial statement versus a budget? Well, you need to know how well you deliver versus the budget. You need to know your real cash position, not your bank account. It shows outside financial stakeholders that you manage your business. You know, you have your financial statements every month, every quarter, whatever. Well, it shows people that you care to look at it versus your budget. So maybe you're taking action to manage the difference between the budget and what you realize. It brings confidence in the management team because it shows that you manage business. A few words about banking. The reality about banks have a tremendous financial capability. When possible, bank financing should be maximized because it's low cost. As lenders, banks are at the low end of the risk spectrum. As lenders, banks like profits, strong equity, and collateral. So to keep that in mind. Eventually, if it's not today, you will work with a bank, you will eventually want to work with a bank. Banks are businesses with shareholders looking for quarterly profits. So they don't take the risk of losing all the money they invest in you. Banks, however, are a lot more than lenders. What to expect from a bank as a startup? Cash management solution, including foreign exchange, payroll solution, anything that can help you manage your cash flow. Sound advices, banker know a lot of people, know a lot of businesses, can help you maybe find contacts in other financial institutions that are maybe more adapted to your current situation. They have a network of financial relations. Micro to small credit solutions, likely based on your personal credit record, collateralized, so personal endorsement, maybe a deposit, maybe a security on certain assets. That's what you would be likely be able to get in a banking institution as a startup company.
All right. I just, because we don't have a lot of time, Eric, so
I'm almost done.
Okay. So because we only have 15 minutes left, and Mathieu and Yann.
Yeah, so I'm done. So there's a financial, what to remember, there's financial partner for every stage of your growth. Dilution is not that bad, although nobody really likes it. Accept compromises, be well prepared, aim at excelling in every phases of your business plan, surround yourself with the best, and well, think, execute, and deliver the plan. That would be basically my, that's it.
All right, thank you so much.
I'll give it too long.
I mean, it's okay, but I hope we will have enough time to cover the Norton Rose part of this presentation. So I'm gonna go ahead and share.
We'll try to make it as fast as possible.
Sounds good. All right, guys.
So thank you, Nor, for presenting our presentation. Usually technical problems always come from the lawyers, so sorry about that. Hello, everybody. Basically, what we're, in the context of investments, what we thought we would be focusing on for this presentation is the due diligence part of the financing, of a potential financing. Given that, well, first of all, you need to start thinking about it right away as you start, developing a project and incorporating your company and so on. And also because it will have an impact on all of the other aspects of the financing, as I will discuss a little bit later. my presentation, and then we'll also turn and focus a little bit more, as Eric alluded to the whole intellectual property aspects of due diligence, and also the protection of your intellectual property. So, no, you can go to the other slide. Basically, there are a few goals to due diligence. The first one is to ascertain the corporation's capital and corporate matters. I'll turn to that a little bit later. Then, does the corporation have good title on its assets? What are potential liabilities of the corporation, and can the corporation actually contractually rely on future cash flows? With respect to ascertaining the corporation's capital and corporate matters, well, this is closely tied to what the investor, and I'm talking about investor here, but Eric will be happy for me to say that it can also be a lender, potential lender. It's closely tied to what the investor is paying for. So namely, in the context of an investor, shares or other securities in the capital of your corporation. So the investor will want to know the class and number of shares or other securities that have been issued before it actually invests in your company. And that's important for the investor because it will want to know, what will be its share of the equity once it acquires shares or securities after the investor makes its investment. Now, the investors will also want to make sure that the corporation has the capacity to issue the shares or other securities that it will acquire in the context of its investment, and that the representatives that will sign the investment agreements related to that investment have the necessary authority for doing so on behalf of the corporation. In order to do that, they will take a hard look at the minute books of your corporation. So that's called a minute book audit, including shareholders agreement, and there are options that are granted to employees who will probably want to look or see a stock option plan for the corporation, which basically lays out the terms of the options that have been granted to employees or potentially consultants. And that's very much to probably make sure that if somebody was involved with the company as an employee and is no longer involved as an employee is no longer employed by the business, then that person no longer has the right or is no longer entitled to acquire shares in the corporation. Now, this is why it's important, and this is why it's important to start thinking about due diligence now, because we need to start maintaining the minute books of your corporation and to document as they occur any subscription of securities, the grant of options, transfer of shares, nomination of directors, and so on, for making sure that you have the right authorizations to do what you need to do once you are in the context of a financing, and that investors know what are the shares that are being issued, that are issued and outstanding at the time of that investor's investment. So a quick note just on the transfer of shares and the granting of options. Very often, the beginning of a project that you're working on, you'll be working with contributors to the project who are promised either shares or options in exchange for their contribution. But then later on, these contributors, for some reason, no longer want to be involved with your project. So it's important when you do that, when you promise shares, and then those people, these contributors, leave the project for all intents and purposes, you need to make sure that either those shares or options, if they have already been issued, are actually repurchased or purchased by somebody who's still involved with the corporation, or in fact, to get a release from those contributors when they leave the corporation or the project, that they are no longer entitled, to the effect that they are no longer entitled to the shares and the securities. This obviously will avoid a situation where these contributors then come back years later when you're upon to get a financing and get a multi-million-dollar financing. Then they say that they are entitled to shares, and obviously this is not good from a perspective of your financing. Investors would just be saying, well, who are these people and why do they claim shares? They claim that they have shares on your capital. Now, I spent a little bit more time on this because I know that for entrepreneurs, it's usually not a priority to make sure that their minute books are in order, but it's important to do it right away so that, when you have something, it's important to keep what I said in mind, because it's important from the perspective of the investors. This is what they will be purchasing. They will be purchasing equity in your corporation. So just that you need to keep that in mind. Then you need to also make sure another purpose of the due diligence is to make sure that the corporation has good titles on the assets that it claims to have. So we'll discuss with Bianca the intellectual property rights, but it also means it also involves assets such as real property, which most startup will have usually a lease agreement, equipment. Most importantly, as mentioned, your most valuable asset is intellectual property, and Bianca will talk about that a little bit later. In the context of due diligence, what the investors will want to see are contracts that confirms that title and the rights that you have on the assets that you claim to have, and also they will also have access to public registries such as IP registries, land registries, or personal property security or movable hypothecs registries, to make sure that if you have assets, they know that if that's the case, there's no encumbrances on those assets that would give a right to a creditor to acquire such assets if the corporation breaches its obligations towards that creditor. Also, other point would be to make sure ascertain the potential liabilities of the corporation. So, what are the contractual undertakings of the corporation? Is the corporation indebted? And obviously, we'll want to look at the credit agreements if there are credit agreements. And another aspect would be also to see if there are potential disputes or litigation that the corporation may have to be faced with. So with respect to that, you will be asked to provide details on those potential claims in the context of due diligence, but also an investor will have access to all public registries, which are referred to in Quebec as the primitif, to the extent that a litigation has already been initiated. And finally, an investor will want to see if if the corporation can contractually rely on future cash flows. So in order to do that, they will take a hard look at contracts with clients, potentially IP agreements, royalty agreements, and so on. Therefore, to the extent that they exist, they will want to carefully review those contracts, and you should make sure that you actually document those contracts and not only rely on verbal undertakings from clients, if at all possible. So the due diligence will vary in scope depending on many factors. Will depend on the industry in which you operate. So obviously, it's very likely that a potential investor will be focused a lot on the intellectual property for startups such as yours. It will depend also on the size of the investment. Obviously, a small investment that will give like a minor stake in the equity of the corporation will require less due diligence. It will depend also on the risk tolerance, materiality thresholds, and the cost and the time constraints of the due diligence. And of course, depending on whether the financing is through debt or equity, it will also have an impact. An investor in debt will focus on its due diligence on ensuring that the debts can be repaid, while an investor in equity will be more interested in determining the potential for the growth of the corporation. Can change to the slide 3, please. The 3. So I'll go quickly from now on, but in terms of organizing the due diligence process, as I mentioned, you need to start thinking about it now. You need to document the contractual undertakings that you have. You need to document any corporate actions that you do in your minute books. That will just facilitate the process whenever you start thinking about a financing, and when you are approached by a potential investor or a bank, so that you will be easily able to provide the documentation that they ask. Now, obviously, before providing any information that may be confidential and sensitive with respect to the corporation, you need to enter into a confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement. And even if an NDA is signed, you should consider whether some of the information is actually too sensitive that it should not be disclosed. I'm thinking about proprietary source code for a software, for example, might be an example of things you may want to think about even disclosing at early stage, at least in the due diligence. Now, it will be then the process will be you will likely sign a term sheet at some point with respect to the financing, and then I guess a more heavy due diligence will start. Usually there will be a request from documents by the investor, and you'll start, and through that request for a document, then you'll define the scope of the due diligence, the areas of focus, and the thresholds issues, usually what is considered to be material for the purpose of the due diligence in terms of amounts, or in terms of what's important as a contract, for example, for your business. Now, the sources of information, as I mentioned already, are either documents, access to management, and publicly available information, either on public registries or primitive, for example. You should not be surprised that there will be follow-up requests and questions from the investors, and that could continue potentially until the closing of financing. You can go to slide 4. This is just a quick overview of things that you would that an investor will want to look at in the context of a due diligence. So I think I've touched upon most of these things. So organizational documents, so the minute books, agreements with respect to prior transactions, public records, financing documents, so credit agreements, security agreements, and so on, material contracts with respect to the operations, and then documentation with in connection with litigation. And go to the last slide on my end. So the due diligence that an investor or a lender makes on your corporation will have an impact on the transaction generally. So it would have an impact on the deal structure. If there are significant liabilities that relate to your business, or if the investor is unable to ascertain the issuing outstanding capital of the corporation, then it may want you to transfer assets to the material assets of your business to a new corporate entity, and then start from anew, and that obviously complicates things quite a bit. So you would obviously want to avoid that to the extent possible. Hence the importance of making sure that you have good minute books again, and you keep track of your contractual undertakings. Obviously, avoid as much as possible litigation. Then it will have an impact on the subscription price, or the amount of financing. Obviously, if the due diligence finding affects if the due diligence results from finding material liabilities, or if assets that were claimed to be yours are not yours, then will have an impact on the valuation of the business made by the investor, and therefore on the subscription price. will have an impact on the representations and warranties that the investor may ask from you in the context of the investing agreement, subscription agreement. If there are potential issues that are uncovered through the due diligence, then the investors are likely to ask for representation and warranties that are more onerous. It will obviously also impact the indemnification provisions in the subscription agreement. If there are specific issues, for example, litigation that your corporation has with with potential third parties, then they may ask specific indemnity, even from the shareholders of the corporation, in which case the shareholders would be on the hook for any damages that result from the litigation, for example. And obviously, the due diligence will inform the content of the disclosure schedules that are provided by the corporation. In some cases, if the due diligence findings are such that there are quite a bit of liabilities that are found that materially changes the investor's expectation and might result in the termination of the financing. And in some cases where issues can be resolved, resulting.
Mathieu, are you still there? All right, it seems like we lost.
From the due diligence corporation, turn to Bianca.
Thank you, Mathieu. So we can jump right into the IP section. Intellectual property is, first and foremost, a corporate asset and should be treated as such, in particular in the due diligence process. So what that means practically is that we're going to take steps to identify the IP and establish that it exists and that is owned by the company. This is done in a number of ways. First and foremost, you need to determine what type of IP asset you have. This is important because different types of IP assets have different rights associated therewith and are documented in a different manner. For example, patents need to be registered in order to exist. So it would be nonsensical for your company to put forth that you have inventions and patents when in fact nothing is registered. In addition, disclosing an invention before it is patented or too long before it is patented will actually eliminate your rights in that invention. So it is important to engage a patent agent or an IP professional to assist you in identifying and protecting patents and inventions accordingly. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we've got trademarks. Trademarks do not need to be registered in order to exist. In fact, a trademark can exist purely based on use. And there are some restrictions that go along with such unregistered trademark use, in particular in the documentation of its existence. For example, if you choose not to elect your trademark, it is very important that you start documenting the date of first use and the use of the trademark associated with the goods or services. For example, this could be publications, this could be radio announcements, this could be in emails attached on a tag to your product. These are all ways that you prove that you are the owner of that trademark and that you establish the time when you first started using it and the geographical area in which that trademark is used. So the importance of identifying and documenting the ownership and existence of these IP assets early on is because it is very, very difficult 5, 10, 15 years down the line to go back into your records and try to determine when was your trademark first used. Whereas if you're doing that as you're going along, come time for a due diligence, you're going to make your lawyer very happy in having all of those documents already in place. Ownership and status of an IP asset can be, as we discussed, registered, but also it's important to determine the accuracy of the information disclosed in your registration. This is because oftentimes IP assets are assigned or sold to other parties. Sometimes one entity or the inventor will file a patent and then that patent will be sold to the corporation and then that corporation will sell it to a subsidiary, et cetera, et cetera. So it is important that if you have experienced such sales throughout the lifetime of the IP asset, that the registration is maintained up to date on the federal government website. So important to reach out to a patent agent or to a trademark agent and make sure that the appropriate assignments are filed and up to date so that the assets are actually reflected in your name. If they are not, to explore why that is and see if it's something that can be remedied fairly quickly. In addition with that, it's also important to keep an eye on upcoming renewals and expiration dates. It would be a nasty surprise to have gone through all of the trouble and effort to register your intellectual property only to realize that no one's been paying attention to expiry dates and have all of that work irradiated from the Federal Registry. Lastly, it is important to keep documents with respect to the development and acquisition of IP. So if you are not the company that is actually developing the IP, but you are purchasing it from a third party, make sure to have those sale agreements or assignments documented, signed, and initialed, because you would not want to find yourself in a situation where the person who sold you the assets then continues to carry on as though they own the assets. With respect to the development of IP, and this is particularly important if you are working in a corporation where you have 2, 3, 4, 5 inventors or people collaborating in developing IP, make sure that the IP is either registered as being collectively owned by those individuals, or that there's an assignment from those individuals who own the IP jointly to the corporation. So the corporation at the end of the day is actually holding all of those IP assets. This can be particularly important if the individuals developing the IP are employees of the corporation. Now, it's important to note that in certain types of IP, like for example, copyright, there is an automatic presumption that a work made for hire or work made an employee for the corporation will automatically assign to the corporation, so that if you are the corporate entity, you will have those rights without having to get a formal assignment from the copyright owners, which is in this case the employees. This is not the case for all IP, so it's very important to be careful. Make sure that you have proper IP assignment language in your employment agreements. This is particularly true for anything that constitutes an invention or has a patent attached to it. So these are items that we are going to be looking for in an IP due diligence, to make sure that the corporation owns the IP assets actually exist, and if they need to be registered, they are in fact registered. Next slide, please. Another portion of our IP due diligence is to verify the interaction with respect to the IP assets between the corporation and all third parties. And here's where we get IP-related agreements. Now, this is important from an IP valuation perspective. We want to make sure that there are, in fact, license agreements, if that is the case, and that the license is being paid and up to date. The amount of license the monetary amount associated with license agreements will help us determine the value of the IP asset, but will also help us to determine whether these assets, these license agreements can be assigned. So what we're looking for specifically in license agreements and, for example, assignments is just any clauses that would be triggered should the IP change ownership. This could trigger an IP assignment where you need to ask permission in order to assign the license agreement. It could trigger exclusivity clauses. Perhaps the IP was meant to be exclusively licensed to one individual, and then by the operation of that exclusivity, you will not be able to assign it to another party. If that's the case, then steps need to be taken for your license, either amend that exclusivity or ask some kind of permission. These are all things that your lawyer can help you sort out, but it's very important that these issues are identified ahead of time, because the closer you get to closing dates, the harder it is to make all those adjustments without delaying your closing. Another solution would be to make a post-closing agenda to deal with those issues after the fact, but the more items that you can deal with before closing and have all your ducks in a row, the happier your investors and purchasers will be. IP protection and enforcement. So this is particularly important for registered IP. You've gone through all the trouble of registering your IP, making sure your IP assets exist, but then you need to take steps to make sure that other people are not infringing on your IP. This is sort of the equivalent of saying, I've got a beautiful apartment building, but no tenants. So you have your IP, you've got your assets, but now you want to use it, and you want to make sure other people are not using it instead of you, so that you get the revenues. What does this mean practically? We're going to be looking at the Canadian Intellectual Property Office to verify if other people are registered registering IP that is confusingly similar with yours. In the case of a trademark, we're going to be verifying sometimes what we call common law searches. So verifying on the market if there are products that are using IP that's confusingly similar with yours, or if there's products that are subject that would fall under the scope of your patent that a competitor might be using and stealing business away from you. If that is identified, then steps need to be taken either at the registration level to stop people from registering competing and infringing IP, or you need to start looking at litigation solutions. So it is important that these steps be taken ahead of time, because one of the reps and warranties that you will be giving on an IP sale is that no one is infringing or using your IP in a manner that they shouldn't be. So it is important to have someone who is actively looking to make sure that that IP is being protected properly. So that person, that individual who's doing that work, can either be an employee in the company, or these are services that are offered by IP lawyers, or trademark agents, patent agents, any professional in the IP sphere. Lastly, we're going to be looking for IP-related disputes. Now, it's important to note that not all IP litigation is bad litigation. In fact, in some contexts, litigation can be considered a good thing. This ties into our IP protection and enforcement. So if you are the plaintiff, the instigator of the litigation, and you have instituted litigation against a third party telling them that they are infringing your IP and they need to back off, this can be a good thing, because it is showing the purchaser that you are taking positive steps to protect your intellectual property, and that there might be some money or some kind of profits coming your way depending on the type of infringement. Now, the type of IP that we will raise as a red flag is any IP that is seeking to invalidate the validity of your IP. So this is where your patent is being threatened, where your trademark is being threatened, where someone is instituting opposition proceedings at the federal level trying to stop you from registering your trademark. Any IP that would threaten, any litigation that would threaten your IP registration is something that needs to be disclosed. Oftentimes, you're going to be asked to give a rep and warranty, which says that there is no IP that is being threatened by litigation. So you need to say except for and list whatever comes out of the IP litigation. Next slide, please. So the last item I want to touch on is IT due diligence, which falls under the umbrella of IP due diligence. This can be broken down in 3 different sections. We're going to be looking at software and IT systems. The purpose of this is to verify if there's any bugs or malware, essentially if the IT systems of the corporation are sufficient for the needs of the business. Oftentimes, you will find a whole section of reps and warranties that pertain specifically to this issue. And the way we do this is that we will ask an independent third party to come into your business and to conduct due diligence review of the IT systems. Usually it's an IT tech company, and they'll do a bunch of tests trying to breach your systems to verify if anyone's been notified, et cetera, et cetera. So that will cover off the IT section. The next portion would be to verify websites and social media. So at this point, we're going to be checking basically if there's any issues with privacy, and if there's any issues with the CASL anti-spam legislation. So we're going to be checking what is going on your social media platforms. Do you have privacy policies, and how you interact with customers in respect to the anti-spam legislation. And the last item that we're going to be looking at is privacy and data security. And this is particularly important if you are working in a medical sphere, or if you are dealing with credit card information or money. So we have very stringent privacy legislation at the federal and the provincial level that dictates how personal identifiable information collected from clients is stored and used. So these are all documents that you should have in your possession, and information that you should be ready to share with your lawyer on an IT due diligence. And that is all for me.
All right. Thank you guys so much for today. Unfortunately, we will not have time to take any questions today. We will be sharing with you the presentations very, very soon. Thank you for all who stayed with us until the end, and I hope to see you guys next week. So next week we're still going to be covering some administrative aspects of the company. So we will be covering Accounting 101 next week again with EY. And then we'll start working on going global and thinking about internationalization. And finally, the last infusion session in a few weeks will be about storytelling, and that will be a very, very interactive session. So I thank you all for joining us today, and I hope to see you all next week. And thanks, Bianca, Mathieu, and Eric for your presentation.
Thank you so